Welcome, travelers. My name is Rich Mayo, and this is Mach 1 Games. I'd like to talk to you today about a role-playing system that has been in development for the last 20 years. And over the course of 20 years, I've been studying the role-playing genre, analyzing, figuring where the flaws are, what the essence of the hobby is. I've played with many different groups over that time and tried to look at the desires and ideas of many different players and many different play styles. And for many years, the project's been frustrating because I couldn't find any kind of commonality across the hobby. And in fact, if you go to the internet, you're going to find so many opinions, so many facile notions about what a system is, and so many people intractable in their positions and absolutely certain of what the core of the hobby is. And one of the challenges, I think Bertrand Russell says it best, and I'm not going to be able to quote him correctly, but in essence, he says one of the flaws of the world is that that fools are so full of confidence and the wise are so full of doubt. And so I don't know if I am a once wise person who's deceived himself into becoming a fool, or if I've actually cracked the code and now do understand. And over the course of these podcasts and taking a look at the role-playing game that I've produced, I can let you the viewer, weigh in on my foolishness. Although I would hazard that, that American president, Kennedy, who suggested that the value of somebody's opinion is only as good as the work that they've done to earn it. So anyhow, that's my plea, my suggestion that you withhold judgment until you actually understand the argument that I'm trying to articulate. So the first thing is that the nature of a role-playing game is this inherent contradiction. We have both a game and a story. And I would say that it actually leads to three levels of play. We have the story that exists, the game that exists in front of us in the real tangible world that happens with dice, sometimes with miniatures. It happens in a shared space. Now, sometimes that shared space is a shared virtual space because, well, it is 2020. But there is a shared physical or tangible space. And then the second level is the level of the shared or spoken story that happens at the table. And then the third level, which is also equally important, is the imaginative space or the not shared story that the imagination of each of the participants. So a role-playing game need and must address these three levels of existence and not shy away from any of them. And even if your player is more focused, and I've run across many players who exist almost exclusively in one of these three zones, they should still be welcome at your table. It's the job of the role-playing game to actually ensure that their rules and that the system actually is transecting all of these worlds at once. So that the story, there's a relationship between the story that's being told and what's in the person's imagination, and then also the mechanisms by which we're resolving things. So let me talk to you about what I have come to call the pillars of my role-playing system. And by that I mean that probably 10 years ago, I started to calcify these inviolate truths of the game that I was making. A good role-playing game must be simple. It must be fast. It must be translatable. It must be extensible, collapsible, reversible. Now, that's a lot of ibbles and words, so let me back up and dig into these so you see where I'm going, because some of these things spawn their own little cyclones of consequence. And one of the things as we get to fast or translatable, you begin to unpack the types of role-playing games that are out there, and you realize how they violate these rules. And when through the violation of these rules, it means you can't build things on top of them. And you start to see, as I go away from talking about the pillars of design and start talking about the consequences and the corollaries and all the other things that make this sound like some kind of academic endeavor and not just a really fun, cool, powerful role-playing game that can be entirely customized by you and your group. And you'll find that customizing it is easy and it's a breeze and it's intuitive. And why is it intuitive? Because of all this other stuff that I've packed in for the 20 years of thinking about this stuff and trying to get it right so that it plays and you engage with it, not in the way that you're hearing my rant now about why it's got to work. So if you're the kind of person that loves the why it's got to work, then this video is for you. But if you're not, the game might be for you. In fact, the game's for all of you. The game is fast. The game is fun. The game is smart. The game doesn't break its own system so that then you have tools and power at your disposal. The person running and managing the game, she's not taking up space in her mind, dealing with minutia that doesn't matter. She is free to build the world and create the interactions and manage things that are important. And that's a real big issue when we start talking about focus. Focus is so deadly important in a role-playing game. Somebody on Facebook posted this really great question, and I like it because it shows that they're thinking about what a dice mechanism actually means. And they put it out to the players, and they said, do you prefer a one dice resolution mechanic when playing your role-playing game, or do you like a two dice cause and effect, or I forget exactly, excuse me if I'm getting your terminology wrong, because I'm somehow that destructive interference in my brain of how I talk about things will perform a translation. And incidentally, that's often how you create misconception, making sure that you're hearing what the person is saying. But I'm pretty sure I'm paraphrasing where they're coming from. They suggested that an action and effect mechanism was similar to something where you roll to hit and get damage, so that there's a two-part resolution. And this was so tantalizingly close to one of the things that I have come to believe about what an ideal resolution mechanism is that you actually don't ask the question, which is the better mechanism. You ask what, in the context, to go all Matt Easton on you, in the context of what's taking place in the shared imaginary world, sometimes you're looking to see how well somebody performs something. Sometimes you're looking to see what the effect of that is. So if you need to make an action effect resolution, that is at your disposal, but it's not the single paradigm that you can understand that I can make an action roll without needing to analyze the effect, or I can make an effect roll to lift a cart without analyzing the action, because one would assume that you would perform the action, the preparatory work to the effect that you're going to create is going to be highly successful. And that's why in Beyond the Role-Playing Game, you have an action roll. The action roll results in 1, 2, or 3 stars of success, 1 star being a marginal or nominal success. You succeed, but there's something not quite perfect. You succeed well is your 2-star effect, and your 3-star effect is you succeed admirably. Everybody's behaving admirably. Where does that come from? Star Trek, correct? Okay, so then that translates into an effect, which is then either resolved on a 1, 2, or 3 dice mechanism. And I'm going to put an asterisk beside there, because what I mean by that is not what you're hearing right now. I can almost guarantee that. But it's close. Okay, it's close. So we can roll an effect, we can roll an action. There's a similar structure around both of those things. Are very simple, but we begin to quickly identify so that everyone at the table understands what the difference between an action and an effect is, and we give the GM control so that she can zoom into what's important and zoom back out. And that's part of this translatable, reversible, collapsible thing that I'm spouting on about, that you need to be able to dial things in. If you had a movie and you watched a movie and it only had one way of showing you anything, that would be a bad movie. And that would also be a bad role-playing game, which is why those who espouse the let's call them the stronger on the narrative role-playing side, critical role crowd, they're going to try to eschew the rules, which can be egregious in its own sense, because the rules are often confining and don't let them explore the different areas. But a correct rule is a tool that helps insert you into an area of action without relying on a GM fiat in order to interpret how the result happens, which is the problem with a pure storytelling point of view. You start to lose the game in that. It's also, once you understand these things, you realize the schism that was created between 2nd and 3rd edition of something like Dungeons and Dragons, which separates the old grognards from the new, tighter systems, especially around areas like the search, perception, investigation, persuasion checks, where a role can circumvent the gaming at the table. I'm going to address those and understand that I can give you a game and a story at the same time and give you a resolution that's pleasing on both sides, that this does not have to be a schism and a rift between types of gamers. I believe that I can unify the gaming world with a system that's done correctly, that understands time. There's another thing on on Facebook, somebody was talking about casting time of ritual spells in Dungeons and Dragons, and then I noted, oh yeah, I guess I didn't realize just how many of the ritual spells didn't have an action as a standard casting time. And once he said it, I agreed on that point. But it was funny. I made a comment that I think missed the point, and it might. Let me make the comment to you. Dungeons and Dragons fifth edition does not have a 6-second combat round. If you go to the book says that you have a 6-second combat round. However, at the table, if there are 5 people on each side of the game, it's inconsistent. You actually have a 1-minute combat round because each person takes 6 seconds to act and move. And of course, time is an arrow that we cannot violate. So just because some game designer somewhere said the game round is 6 seconds and it's all happening at the same time, and some nerd can look at a book and point and say the combat round is 6 seconds, that doesn't make it true. That doesn't make it the experience at the table. And this is what so many people get wrong when they're looking at role-playing systems. They'll read a rule and say, okay, well, this solves it, not realizing that it's going to violate what actually comes next, which is at the table, sequentially, a character acts. Everything that happens in that moment happens before in the minds of the players. In the internal mind of the players, in the narrative, and in the real world, in all 3 levels of the game, you have sequential actions. You do not have concurrent actions. So, if you have 10 participants in a combat, your round is 60 seconds. If you have 2 participants in a combat, your round is 12 seconds. It's just how it plays out. Now you're going to bring up well, no, it's not really 12 seconds because I have, I'm using this paralysis, right? So my character only acts once. Every character in the universe can only act once. It can only use one of their 6-second segments. And I'm saying, and I understand that. Yes, you are right. Each person only gets 6 seconds of time within the 1 minute of action. They're paralyzed for the rest of it. The fact that you think that they somehow overlap means that you're not understanding all the levels that the game is happening on. So, this isn't, some people who are highly concrete thinkers will have a hard time, and they're going to challenge me on this one because they're going to say, no, it does achieve concurrency because they're only looking at it from the one point of view. And yes, from the one frame of reference, you are correct. I'm saying from every other frame of reference, that is not true. And I've been a school teacher, and I recognize too where people are going to respond to certain rules and certain statements in a way that violate their conception of things. And I don't want that to turn you off. I want you to take a leap of faith with me that I can show you something and actually give you some tools that lead to some really cool and crazy outcomes. So I've diverged, and I'm probably going to do that. Maybe I'm going to get tighter and better at this YouTube thing. But simple, fast, translatable. This is translatable. Translates directly into narration, and your outcome can be measured. A translatable game means that I know what something means. When my character gets hit and gets hurt, I know what it looks like on my character sheet. I know how I can interpret it in the world, that it actually bounces back and forth, that I'm not going to use these abstract, absurd concepts like an armor class. Not to pick entirely on D&D, I've got a large catalog of other role-playing games that I've read. I just want to meet you guys, read and played. I want to meet you guys at the most common place. And the armor class, unfortunately, measures two things at once. It measures how hard you are to hit and how agile you are. And it's a bit of a mishmash. It's not... It just doesn't make sense. Let me take a look at Hitpoints. Does the same thing. Hit point is a mishmash between your health and your divine favor. So when a character who has a lot of hit points is hit, well, then they might not be hit. It might not be a real wound. It might be divine favor. It's like saying, I'm going to give you a score for your color volume. And your color volume is a mixture of both how bright the color is and how loud you are being. So if I have a color volume of 10, you have no way of knowing whether that means I'm wearing something bright or being somewhere loud. The only time you know what my color volume means is when it's 0. It's the only time you know what hit points mean. When it's 0. That doesn't work. That's not translatable. That's not understood at the table. And it's boring. It's frankly boring just to watch your number come down. And I understand that every video game out there, well, other than Bushido Blade, has followed hit points. There's a throwback. Let me see somebody give some love for Bushido Blade in the comments. Come on, original PlayStation 1. Anyhow, translatable, extensible means that I give you a role-playing system where you can plug in whole rule sets inside of it. You want to play add fatigue rules. Bang, they bolt in and work. They don't change the rules that came before. What they do is they add an expansion and you can review the world. So everything can be bolted in and taken out depending on the type of game, the style of game that you want to play. Collapsible means that the add-on rules are mechanically equivalent to the earlier rule so that you can play at a low level of detail and a high level of detail. You can resolve something in an action sequence and you can resolve something in a task sequence. They are the same mechanism looked at from two different ways for two different types of situations and or players. Some players are going to want to live in the action sequence. And by action sequence, I don't mean combat. We always complain about the murder hobos. The medium is the message. We have a game that only models one thing well, combat. So what do you think the players do? They fight because chase sequences are boring. Well, with an action sequence where chase sequences and chasing, running, hunting, survival, having all these sequences, elevating them up, people moving around to get cover, so you have a ranged warfare sniping situation. Those aren't fun in most role-playing games. There's some exceptions. Let's put another asterisk on that. Some games do some neat things. Other times you see people having to import entire rule ecosystems to give chases something different than combat. You don't need to do that. A unified action sequence that's actually correct, actually manages time correctly, understands the difference between characters' action and their speed, understands how things happen. That solves it. we can get a great role-playing experience where it's fun to investigate, it's fun to chase, it's fun to sneak, it's fun to engage in all kinds of shenanigans with your characters. I've been reading Scott Lynch's Lies of Lochmora. I'm on to the second book. I'd greatly recommend it for fans of fantasy. And I've also been thinking, I could model this. I could do a great job of modeling this with a role-playing system. And that's the other thing. When you read fantasy books, you read your Guy Gavriel Kays, you read your Dave Duncans, you read Brandon Sanderson, and he comes up with a magic system, and you get certain rules. Most role-playing games could not handle any of those imaginings, which means that when a GM first encounters a role-playing system, they have to look and go, well, I have an idea for a world, I have a setting, what system should I play? And don't think that I've missed the GURPS thing. There's things I love about GURPS. There's also some huge problems, and it's got timing problems as well. Created by granulation, not created in the same way, because you have the quick 1 second thing. The problem is you get homogenization through granulation. That's another problem that D&D and GURPS suffer from, and there's ways to solve that. So, I've gone on long enough. I'm Rich Mayo. This is Mach 1 Games, and I just want to introduce you to Beyond the Role-Playing Game. I got some great things coming for you guys, and yeah, I hope I get better at this video thing. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time. Oh, and probably a subscribe button. I don't even know which side of the screen. Subscribe. It's somewhere. I'll get this figured out. All right. Take care.